Hello, I'm Annie Davey. I've been telling Bible stories to children for many years. If you want to know about the background, where I got some of the background detail from, you can look it up on the web on truthortradition.com or www.korky.info, where we've written a book called Jesus, Faith and Fact. So it's all in there somewhere, but there's some interesting things here which you may not know. You may think you do know the stories, but wait and see. So let's see what we've got. Hello, got something a bit different for you today. A lot of stories all in one, more than two for the price of one, because I want you to see where the stories are leading to. I've done lots of stories on YouTube about Jesus and the stories from the Gospels, but only a few yet so far from the Old Testament. But all the stories in the Old Testament lead up to the New, and it's quite exciting to see the continuity of God's story with his people and eventually with us. So we start off today with God's creation. The Bible teaches that God created the world and everything in it. It doesn't say how he did it, and scientists are discovering bit by bit how it might have happened. But the Bible just says that he spoke and it happened, and he spoke and we could see the stars. And the universe is so big, it's impossible to imagine how big God must be. We can't begin to imagine him, can we? And then he had this lovely relationship with the first people who knew him. Who were they? Remember? Adam and Eve. They walked with him in the garden and they had a lovely life. And only one thing he said, don't do. Don't touch that tree in the middle. That's a special one. I just don't want you to touch that one. And they did. And they wrecked the relationship that they had with God. And they had to leave the garden. He said, go away. You can't stay here anymore. I can't cope with people who don't obey. But he did promise that one day he would send somebody who would rescue us. And the whole of the Old Testament is looking forward to the arrival of that one person. And then we come on to the story of when people had filled the earth and they were all dreadful. And they were so bad that God was actually sorry he'd made any of them. He wished he hadn't. And he said, I'm just going to wipe the slate clean. I'm going to get rid of all of them. Oh, but there's one man who does trust me. And that man was this person here. I expect you've all heard the story of Noah and his ark and how he built this great big boat. And the Bible says that the animals came to him 2 by 2. He didn't have to go out hunting for them. He built this great big boat with more to go into. And I painted it black because it was covered with tar to keep the water out. There was plenty of tar around in those days. It still is actually. Put the roof on. And the people all laughed at him and said, what a silly man. We're in the desert here. What's he building a boat for? Silly man. But after a long time, when he nearly finished the boat, black clouds began to appear in the sky. And it began to rain and rain and rain. On a programme last night on television, Chris Packham said it rained for millions of years. The Bible puts it down to a period of time as 40 days and 40 nights. It was a long time anyway. I don't think that Noah lived for millions of years. But there was a great flood and everybody was washed away. Everything was washed away. And they floated on that great, vast lake for weeks. Until one day it went quiet. They thought, that's funny. The rain stopped. And out came the sun. And they sent out a raven and a dove. And the dove came back with nothing, and the raven just disappeared. They do that. So let's just put this picture up here. Let's see what happened. I bet you know. Oops, that's sticky enough. The sun came out, and with it, a great big rainbow. And with the rainbow, God promised he'd never do that again. He'd never flood the entire earth. So he sent out Noah and the animals to go forth and multiply, and they did. But again, after a period of thousands of years, the people were all getting above themselves again, and they decided they'd build a tower. They'd be as good as God. They'd be up as high as heaven. They'd see what it all looked like. And they built this ziggurat, which is like a stepped pyramid. And it's still there, actually, the Tower of Babel, not far from Babylon. And this is a piece of brick and mortar, which has been tested at Durham University. And it was brought back quite legally by my husband Corky when he was out there in 1963. He chopped a bit off. It's so hard, it was very hard to get off. And Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the Tower of Babel with his own bricks because he couldn't knock the old one down. He wanted to be the one who built Babylon and rebuilt the Tower of Babel, but he didn't manage it. So that's an interesting brick from the Tower of Babel, isn't it? It's a bit dangerous to go and visit it now, but one day we may be able to again. So God confused their languages. He said, I'm not having this. And he made them all talk different languages. So one would be saying, pass me the hammer, mate. And the other was saying, what are you talking about? Hey, je comprends pas. Qu'est-ce que vous dites? Was sagen Sie? Das ist ja dumm, Unsinn. And they couldn't understand one another. So of course they had to stop building, and they scattered across the earth. And that's why we've got all the different nations today. And thousands of years later, God thought, I'm not giving up on these people. I'm going to have one friend. I'm going to make a special family. So he chose Abraham. And he made a promise to Abraham. If he would leave his city with his father and his nephew and travel north, there would be a special land that God promised them, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wonderful place. But Abraham was the only one who followed him. And he had a wife called Sarah, who was lovely, beautiful lady. But as the years went by, they didn't have any children. But God had promised him as many children as the stars in the sky. And still they didn't have any. So Sarah said, well, why don't you have a baby with my servant? That'd be as good as having one of our own. So he did. And Ishmael was born. But that wasn't the child of the promise. And eventually, when they were both very old, I think Sarah was in her 90s, older than me by a long way, a very long way, they had a baby boy called Isaac. And you can imagine they were so thrilled. Isaac means laughter. And Isaac became the father of Esau and Jacob, who were terrible twins. Esau was very hairy, and he was very angry, and he was a hunter. And Jacob was very smooth, and he liked cooking and staying at home in the tent with Mum. And they had a big argument in the end. Jacob cheated Esau out of being the firstborn son, getting the blessing from his dad. And he became known eventually as Israel. And he had, how many sons? Let's look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 boys. My goodness, that must have been a noisy household, mustn't it? Not all from the same mum, but that was allowed in those days. And one of those happened to be Joseph. Do you remember the story of Joseph and his Technicolor dream coat? Trouble was, Israel, Jacob, made a fuss of him. He had a favourite. And Joseph and his younger brother Benjamin were his favourites. Not a good idea. And so they got rid of Joseph, his brothers. They got him into a pit. They sold him to some slave traders. They thought they got rid of him. But if you remember, when he arrived in Egypt, eventually, he rose up through Pharaoh's household to become the head of the house, the head of the country, prime minister. Because of his foresight, with 7 years of plentiful harvests, providing for 7 years of famine, he saved not only the whole country, but also his whole family who came to join him. A wonderful story. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll go on with another half of this story another time, or it'll take too long.